In the dark heart of the Canadian wilderness, a group of high school boys teetered on the brink of panic. Their breaths were shallow. The weight of their backpacks, packed with over 400 pounds of weed, threatened to crush their hopes of a clean escape. They weren't just any group of teenagers. These were the masterminds behind a smuggling empire, their stolen fortune growing by the day, but their secret was as fragile as the whisper of wind in the trees. If their parents knew, they'd be dead before the night ended. Suddenly, a shadow loomed, the unmistakable shape of a divan, parked eerily in the woods, stalking them like a predator in the dark. As the boys crouched low, preparing to vanish into the trees, Nate Norman, the group's fearless leader, silenced them with a finger to his lips. His heart pounded, but his mind remained cold. He flicked on his night vision goggles, the green glow revealing the truth. The D-agents. They were asleep, oblivious to the empire they were about to disrupt. With a smirk playing on his lips, Nate led his crew through the night, past the sleeping foes, and home $500,000 richer. They had just pulled off the easiest score of their lives. Nate Norman was no criminal mastermind, at least not yet. He was a 19-year-old dropout, barely scraping by with a dead-end job at Pizza Hut, living in his mom's basement in Idaho. His dreams of wealth and freedom were as far out of reach as the moon. All he had was a flicker of ambition, stoked by the flickering images of Scarface playing on his TV. But one day, as Nate lounged in his buddy Toffer's basement, lazily passing a joint back and forth, flipping through High Times magazine, he stumbled upon a story that would change everything. Canada, the home of the world's finest weed, the BC Buds, a product worth billions, and smuggling it across the border, a multi-billion-dollar industry. The spark was lit. Idaho's right next to Canada, Nate thought. This could be our ticket out of here. Excitement surged as Nate turned to Toffer, his mind already racing ahead. We should become international drug smugglers. Toffer laughed, but the idea stuck. The only problem? They didn't have the money to buy even a pound of weed. The job at Pizza Hut wasn't paying for yachts or Ferraris. But Toffer believed in Nate, and when Nate's determination hit a boiling point, Toffer sold an old boat for $1,400, their last shot at making it big. With the meager funds in hand, they drove to Canada, dreams soaring high. But the reality of the border wasn't as glamorous as the pages of High Times had promised. It wasn't a roadside marketplace full of easy deals. It was a different world altogether, one they weren't prepared for. They stumbled into a seedy Canadian bar, their hopes still burning brightly. It wasn't glamorous, but they needed to find a way to make this trip worthwhile. That's when they met Frankie, an old man who seemed to know just what they needed. But as they followed him to his shabby apartment, the warning bells began to ring in Nate's head. Frankie seemed off, but they were desperate, willing to trust anyone who could get them the goods. "How much cash you got?" Frankie asked. "For $1,400. Will that be enough?" Frankie grinned. "That's perfect." They handed over their life savings without hesitation, trusting in the dream they were chasing. But as Nate opened the bag to take a sniff of what was supposed to be the finest BC bud, his stomach dropped. It didn't smell right. But it was too late. They had already paid, and their only choice was to hope for the best. With a single pound of weed in their possession, Nate and Toffer's biggest challenge lay ahead: getting back across the border. The plan seemed simple enough on paper until they realized just how vast and unprotected the Canadian border truly was. The thick woods stretched endlessly before them, and they walked miles, each step heavier than the last. But their plan was risky, the stakes higher than they'd ever anticipated. When they finally crossed, a mix of fear and excitement surged through them. But as they shared their first celebratory smoke, something felt off. The weed wasn't BC bud. It was cheap Mexican brickweed. They'd been scammed. But in Idaho, where weed was rare, they could still make a profit. A quick call to Skaz, a local hustler, and their plans had shifted. Now, with a pound of weed and a rapidly escalating operation, Nate Kantoffer began to understand the complexity of the world they had stepped into. It wasn't just about the drugs. It was about the people they met, the risks they took, and the ways they would soon bend the law to their will. The duo had thought they were in the clear, but their dreams took a harsh turn. Nate had sent Toffer ahead, while he waited in the car, watching the empty roads for any signs of trouble. But Toffer's solo journey ended with a realization that sent chills down his spine. The weed they had smuggled wasn't what they thought. But even this failed deal didn't stop their momentum. The taste of success lingered, and with their hustler's mentality, they found a way to keep the wheels turning. Skuz came through. A quick flip of the product, and their $1,400 investment grew to $2,800. It wasn't BC Bud, but it didn't matter. It proved the formula worked. Nate's eyes gleamed with excitement. Why doesn't everyone do this? And from there, it all snowballed. A multi-million-dollar operation was born in the shadows of Idaho's mountains. Nate and Toffer's world was now one of rapid growth. As they made their money, their ambition exploded. They moved more product, took on bigger risks, and began to see the world as their playground. But with every victory came a heavier burden. The pressure of expanding their operation weighed on them, and soon, Nate was no longer just a small-town dealer. He was building an empire. Money flooded in, but so did the danger. Nate and Toffer began dealing in larger quantities, moving thousands of pounds across borders, all while their lavish lifestyle grew. Parties, luxury cars, and attention from the wrong people became the new norm. The more they earned, the more they risked. But with their egos inflated and their empire expanding, they had no idea how close they were to falling. Power brings enemies, and with enemies comes betrayal. Kwang, a former friend turned rival, plotted to take Nate down. Kwang wasn't afraid to fight dirty, and he quickly found ways to turn Nate's friends against him. Soon, Nate's world was falling apart. Betrayals, shootings, and the looming threat of the FBI closing in on him. His empire, once invincible, crumbled under the weight of its own ambition. And in the end, Nate's empire fell. Arrested, betrayed, and left with nothing, he could only reflect on his rise and fall. From a broke teenager to a drug kingpin, Nate had touched the sky only to crash back down. His story wasn't one of triumph. It was a harsh lesson in the cost of ambition, the perils of the drug trade, and the fleeting nature of success. From nerd to narco, Nate Norman played the game smarter than anyone saw coming. But every empire rises, and every empire falls. Want to see how the genius behind the keyboard became the king of the streets? Hit that follow, drop a like, and dive deeper into the dark rise of Nate Norman.